I'll get started. Hello everyone, my name is Ashley Ruhl. Welcome to my talk on Camerawork as emotional engagement in games. I've been a cinematic designer for about 6 years now. It's admittedly a very niche field, but I hope my unique perspective will give you ideas on how to make your games more cinematic and emotionally engaging. So my goals for this talk are to address why and how cinematics or cutscenes work, why they affect us emotionally, what techniques we've learned from film, and how we can apply it to games, and last but not least, basically a bare-bones cinematic toolkit for you to bring a cutscene experience into your game at any budget level. So the word cinematic gets used in different contexts for games a lot. Often people say a game is cinematic when it just is movie-like, or it's realistically rendered with a high attention to detail, like you can see all the rain droplets and skin pores, that's what makes it cinematic, or that it simply has cutscenes. For the purposes of this talk, cinematic means a visual story told through the established techniques of film. I'm also going to include that bringing cutscenes should as close to film realism as possible, meaning we want to replicate film techniques as much as we can in games to make it feel like film. In a digital medium, it's very easy for digital cameras to get away from us and feel less realistic than a film camera. So the more we can push our cameras to feel like film, the more serious the cinematics feel, the more they feel like you're watching a movie or you're part of a movie or a TV show. This talk will also focus on authored cameras, which take control away from the player for a certain amount of time to tell the story or advance the story or introduce characters and scenes. These are mostly used for dialogue scenes, where two characters are talking back and forth, or it can be used to reveal new information to the player, like a big boss fight or a new area, or it sets a dramatic tone for the gameplay. Like in the case of the giant boss, it gives you the stakes. The cinematic sets the emotional tone for this giant creature, and then it sets the stakes so that when you defeat it, it's more satisfying. If you are interested in learning great techniques for designing emotional in-game cameras, so cameras that are player-controlled but are slightly manipulated, I highly recommend running the cost talk from GDC 2013, creating an emotionally engaging camera for Tomb Raider. It's a great talk about how they manipulated the camera in space around the player's control of the camera to engage players emotionally. So I didn't always know that I wanted to be a cinematic designer. I didn't know it was a thing when I was in school. I graduated in 2010 with an animation degree, and I really thought I was going to be a character animator. But I always thought, oh, I'll shoot for Pixar and land wherever I land. So I graduate half a year, and dozens of applications later, I'm still looking for a job, and I'm looking at animation, I'm looking in games, and just nothing is sticking. And a friend that I met at GDC said to me, hey, we're hiring cinematic designers at BioWare Austin. You should apply. And I was like, what's a cinematic designer? I didn't know if I was qualified, but I applied anyway. And 2 months later, I'm living in Austin helping ship cinematics for Star Wars The Old Republic. That was super fun. It was a jump into the deep end, and I learned a ton in terms of camera work and choice-based games. Since then, I've worked as a cinematic designer on 2 SWTOR expansions, Trion Worlds MMO shooter Defiance, and multiple titles from Telltale Games, including Walking Dead Season 2, The Wolf Among Us, Tales From the Borderlands, Minecraft Story Mode, Walking Dead Michonne, and most recently, Walking Dead A New Frontier. Yeah, it's a very compressed amount of time at Telltale. I was also the director of Episode 3 of Tales From the Borderlands and assistant director on Episode 1. So for the past 6 years, I've been designing cameras and character performances, mainly in choice-based games. Oh, also, reminder that I'm probably going to have some spoilers, at least for The Walking Dead Season 2, if anybody is concerned about that. So I didn't grow up with video games. It wasn't something that was in my household, but I always knew I wanted to tell stories. I was fascinated by visual narratives, how stories could grab me emotionally, just without words, just expressions and camera work, something, that really affected me deeply. We owned a PlayStation 2 when I was in high school, but nothing really quite captured me until I discovered Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. I love the world, the characters, but most of all, how the story was told. I had spent hours with the Prince and Farah, and when it came to the cutscenes, I saw their relationship develop and the small emotional moments and the grand gestures, and I felt like the cinematics really helped me get to know who they were as people. And I was in the story, and I cared about them. And it felt like I was in the story, not just watching it. And I love this game. I replay it all the time with my sister. And for a long time, nothing really scratched that same itch until Mass Effect came out. It was 2007. I'd never heard of Mass Effect, and my boyfriend brought home a used copy. And I'm like, what is this space game? And I wasn't into shooters, so I wasn't really I didn't know what it was. But he was going to play, but he said, I want you to design Shepard. And I realized, oh, you can play a female Shepard? Oh, that's amazing. I designed this red-headed woman, and then the opening cutscene plays. This is the first time you see your character. This is the first introduction to your character and to the world.
Air Terrace Prime relays in range. Initiating transmission sequence. We are connected. Calculating transit mass and destination. The relay is hot. Acquiring prospector. All stations secure for transit.
Immediately hooked. Let's see if I can get out of this without it. Nope. Sorry about this. Yeah, within a minute of this cutscene, without my character saying a single word, firing a single shot, I already felt like the hero. I believe this is in large part because of the camera design in this scene. The camera follows Shepard. You're literally sharing her perspective. You're following her story, and you know what your character looks like, but they don't show you her face. It gives a sense of mystery, grandiose. Like, this person is important. Everybody is acknowledging her as she walks by. These are characters that you'll get to know as time goes on. They're part of her life, but they acknowledge her as this character of importance. And then this all culminates in the final reveal of Shepard, where you see her face, and you get this dramatic reveal as the camera swings around and saying, this is you, this is your story, go save the galaxy. It just makes you feel powerful before you even get into the gameplay. So this is why I've been interested in cinematics, is just how cameras affect us emotionally and how it can really amplify our experience in games. But not a lot of people know where cinematic designers come from. It's an interesting need in the game industry. So, for example, in AAA straightforward cutscene work, stuff like The Last of Us, Uncharted, Grand Theft Auto, the plot is set, the characters are set, everything can be recorded and done. And those games tend to have about 8 to 10 hours of cinematic content. They're very straight-driven, so they only need one manager, basically, whether it's a narrative lead or a creative director or somebody who's managing all of this. But then say you want a story that has multiple endings or big choice moments that divert the story and the cutscenes for the rest of the game, or you want the protagonist to speak and have different things to say in your dialogue scenes, or you want to fully voice and cinematically direct all of your side quests like SWTOR did. SWTOR is probably the biggest, Star Wars: The Old Republic is probably the biggest VO undertaking in game history. It's ridiculous because it's in 3 languages and there's hours and hours and hours. But yeah, it's a lot of work. Or you want to produce episodic stories like Telltale, where you have new content coming out every few months. This adds up to 100+ hours of cinematic work, and it can't be really managed by one person, and it doesn't need to be. It's straightforward stuff that a team of people can throw assets in and get cameras shooting at the characters and enough character performance to move on and get to the next thing. So this is where cinematic designers come from. Cinematic designers are the glue between writing, animation, and design for large amounts of story content. Using an animation library, camera system, and timeline editor, cinematic designers can build large amounts of story content very rapidly and very iteratively. When I say animation library, this is animators create a library that cinematic designers can pull from, whether that's locomotion or acting or facial gestures or blinks or head turns. All of these things, we can take all the assets and create unique experiences, unique performances every single time with a limited amount of assets. This also means that scenes don't need to be completely locked down in pre-production. If stuff changes for writing, design, or environment during your game, cinematic designers can go back and adjust. It's not all mocapped ahead of time where everything is set and nothing can change. Stuff can move around, and cinematic designers can react to that stuff. For a great deep dive on conversation editor processes and just conversation systems in general, check out the Extra Credits YouTube series. They recently had a video, What Happened to Mass Effect Andromeda's Animation. They show a lot of examples of what a conversation system looks like and how this stuff comes to be. I joke that anytime people ask me, so what exactly does a cinematic designer do? I just want to point them to this video because it explains it better than I can do in a short amount of time. So Hollywood narrative structure has been in games for a while now in the form of cinematics, but we're always refining our techniques. I did want to briefly address here the arguments against cinematics, primarily that they interrupt the flow of gameplay. Cinematics are a solution. They're not the solution to narrative delivery in games, but they are a well-crafted solution that we have developed over the years. I personally believe we're getting better at emotional camera work in player-controlled situations, but we're still perfecting that story, that compelling story and player agency. So it's really up to you to know, does your game have the same amount of emotional impact without cutscenes, without showing character faces, without that intimate camera work that really reveals characters' personalities and goals and internal conflicts. And that's fine. But additionally, we can also just learn from what cinematics have done and what film does, the language of film, to make our games better in the future. But for now, cinematics are an effective method of delivering an emotional experience to your players. So for me personally, I've always been excited when a cutscene would start and see my hero. I'm like, oh, that's a person I've been playing for hours, and I get to see their face, and it's like I'm meeting them again. I get to spend time with them now. I love learning more about those characters, and the cutscene allows me to spend time with them when I'm not just jumping or climbing or stabbing or shooting something. I get to see them as people. We get nuanced performances and dimensionality with characters that we spend a lot of time with. We know their abilities mechanically, but cutscenes help us connect emotionally. Cinematics place you at the center of the story. They make you the movie star. The cameras exaggerate all the ordinary things you do in gameplay into something that's much more dramatic and emotionally impactful. You feel more like a hero when the camera makes you feel like a hero. And we also get excited by characters that we've built, that we've embodied. It's especially in games like Mass Effect, where we've created our avatar and we put them in this world. We feel like it's a piece of us walking around in the world. So we're really emotionally invested in a story we've lived. And if the cameras can be intimate with that character, give you more of their personality and who they are as a person, then it just makes you feel like you're more part of the story. Cinematics are exciting and fun, but what makes them better at telling a story rather than just gameplay? Well, as a 100-plus-year-old medium, film is incredibly accessible to all audiences. Everyone they don't necessarily study film, but they are affected by the psychology of film. Camera framing sets the emotional tone for your game and your character's role in it, And it gives us the freedom to be emotionally expressive in ways that a gameplay camera, which is focused on showing as much as possible and keeping you informed of how your actions affect the world, it can be more intimate, it can be more relatable. And we can also show game mechanics in really cool ways and make them look more heroic and epic. And game mechanics are also more external. A gameplay camera is showing you all the external ways you affect the world, but a cinematic camera can show you the internal conflicts that the character is going through. Anything that's happening in their face and their internally in their lives, the conflicts they're dealing with, cinematic cameras can show that. So in this example in World of Warcraft, these are both from the new Legion expansion. The one on the left is mechanically functional. The camera is mechanically functional because it shows you everything you need to beat the boss, to keep them in view. But the cinematic grips us really emotionally, and it shows how epic it is to stab a giant boss in the face, and it's really emotionally impactful too if we had just been playing as that character or alongside that character moments before. So how can you start adding emotionally engaging cinematic experience to your game? I can't possibly cover all of film studies in this talk, but I'm going to cover what rules have become staples of my work and things that I've just found very helpful over the years. And also, even if you're not applying this to being a filmmaker, it's still something you can reflect on as a critical viewer of film and cutscenes. Be like, oh, that's why that shot works. If you would like to know more resources and study more about film, these are the things that got me started. That I jumped into when I was an animator. I didn't really know that much about camera work, and these three resources really helped me focus my film work and film studies. Hollywood Camerawork is a DVD series. You can also, I think, get it online for like a subscription service. It's incredibly dryly explained. This GIF is from the video series, so everybody is just deadpan. But it's all about the camera. It's about how the camera is telling the story, none of the characters are. But yeah, it's kind of hard to sit through, but you will learn everything about framing cameras. Shot by Shot focuses on emotional intent in framing, and Blink of an Eye focuses more on editing and the importance of how you order sequential shots. So first of all, you want to establish a camera style for your game. You want to find things like movies and TV that match thematically, emotionally, what your game is like. And then just stick with that style, and keep it as like a Bible, that you follow that kind of shot structure. So examples like a drama, like The Godfather, it's a lot of steady shots, a lot of close-ups, focusing on micro-expressions, very subtle emotional changes in eye movements. Or an action film, like Taken, where it's chaotic and the camera is barely keeping up as everything is happening around you, and it's super shaky cam and it's everywhere. Or you can do an action film like John Wick, where the camera, instead of, it's a ballet of violence. Instead of trying to catch up, the camera is emphasizing the action. It is part of the protagonist's action through the scene and emphasizing all of his behavior, and maintains focus and rhythm up to the next beat. Or is it a comedy where the camera and editing deliver jokes through framing and timing? The camera is an actor that's telling you jokes in the scene. Of course, I'm always just aspiring to be Edgar Wright. It's amazing. But these are just a couple of examples, but there are hundreds of cinematic styles that you can borrow from, and you can just pull wholesale from these resources. Say, I want it to look like Walking Dead, the TV show. I want it to look like Game of Thrones, the TV show, or I want it to look like these particular movies. Just study them and see exactly what kind of shots they use. So this is going to start my deep dive into camera work. I hope it's interesting. The camera is a visual narrator, and the way you frame your scene communicates to the audience what you want them to feel in each moment. The camera tells you who you're supposed to empathize with, who you should fear, which moments are comforting and which are terrifying. The camera is part of your storytelling. And the quickest way to get your players to empathize with the character is a close-up shot, which is shot from the shoulders or just above the shoulders or just the character's head. the focus of the frame is their face, is their emotional state. This is the window into their internal conflict. We can see, this is something we don't always get in a gameplay camera because we're usually behind the shoulders. So this really introduces emotional conflict into your game. And a close-up from facing the face is going to be a better window into their emotional state, whereas a camera that shoots from the side in a profile shot means that you're still looking at their internal conflict, but you're they have emotionally closed themselves off from you, the viewer. So, for example, in this shot, Clementine has just observed something incredibly horrific. That was a player choice. The player decided that Clem should see that. And she is incredibly grossed out by what has just happened, but she wants to be strong. She wants to be okay with what just happened. So even as you just see that slight micro-expression where she's just starting to express how she feels, she closes it off, turns away from the camera, and closes herself off emotionally from the viewer. She said, no, I'm going to be strong. I'm not going to show how I really feel in this moment. Insert shots are another version of close-ups. They focus on little details to direct the player's eye to something relevant in the story. They should only be, in games, they should only be information that's available to the protagonist. And this is the first introduction into how game cameras are a little different than film cameras, because if you're embodying a particular character in a game, you never want to give the camera, you never want to show stuff on screen that your protagonist wouldn't have, because then that becomes an informational distance. Because you have information that your character doesn't, and then you're like, well, this is how I would behave with this new information, but you can't do that with a character that doesn't know what's happening. So insert shots and basically any camera shot should be something that's within the purview of the character you're controlling. And in this example, this isn't exactly the point of view of Reese, but it's focusing on exactly what's important to him in this moment. He really needs this boost to charge all the way up, and then we can move to the button to initiate the button press so that he can get going. Over-the-shoulder shots are some of the most commonly used in dialogue scenes. They're very, very useful. They bring characters together in the frame, and simultaneously you're seeing from the perspective of one character while you're seeing the emotional response of the other. So you feel like you're emotionally invested in both characters as you flip back and forth between them. You share the perspective of the protagonist, and the closest the viewer can get to being in the eyes of the protagonist without losing them in the shot is an over-the-shoulder. Because if you shoot from a point of view, you're doing a first-person camera, and that doesn't necessarily feel like, you don't get to see your character or how they're reacting to the scene, so it doesn't have the same emotional impact. You do want to be careful that you don't overuse over-the-shoulders, though, because if you keep flipping back and forth on the same over-the-shoulders, it can get pretty repetitive and boring. But like in this example, you can see both characters' reactions, and Clem is not comfortable with comforting a very sad pregnant woman in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, but she does it because she needs to. And we also get a window into Rebecca's conflict that she feels uncomfortable with the situation, but she is desperate. She really has no other place to turn to. So we get both of their stories in these two shots. Shot verticality can change how the viewer perceives certain characters in the scene and makes certain characters feel powerful, certain characters feel weak. Shooting from below, you can make the character feel very big in the frame. Like our standard camera is, if it's a person, it's shot at eye level, so everything is even. But if you move the camera lower and you shoot upwards, you can make them feel big, you can make them feel powerful. Whereas if you shoot from below, or shoot from above, and bring the camera up and point it down, you can make the character feel small or weaker. And so in this example, you can see these two characters, the big boss creature and the player character. The boss feels very big and intimidating because he's shot from below. And then in the following shot, it's an over-the-shoulder of the beast. You can look down at the player, and they look very tiny in the frame. They look very weak in comparison. So we have set the emotional stakes for this big boss fight which just makes it more satisfying when you finally take it down. You're like, yeah, this thing was massive and dangerous, and I took it down. It feels amazing. Dutch angles are the technique of tilting the camera to one side or another. For the most part, most of your shots should be straight, but for the moments that you need to feel really uncomfortable or just tense, if you can Dutch it just slightly. If you overuse it, people can tell and it loses its emotional weight. It should always be motivated, but it creates this sense of unease. In this example from SWTOR, this is the Emperor Valkorion. He's trying to claim the mind of the protagonist, and he's literally almost falling over in the frame. He's dominating the frame, and it makes it feel uncomfortable as you're at your last, your last wit trying to take down this great boss, and it's supposed to make you feel extremely uncomfortable in the shot. Camera motion is, it keeps the scene dynamic, and it's interesting to watch, but it has to have certain rules. The main being that it should always be motivated motion. Cameras should never move without being motivated. It can follow a character's action, a head turn, an environment reveal, a sound, but the camera should never move without something coming before it. In games, you want to let the protagonist's perspective guide the motion of the camera. In this example, whenever Clem is turning her head to the side, looking around, the camera is whipping around to follow her perspective. This scene also keeps the camera moving to make it feel hectic. It's in the middle of a zombie herd. You want to feel uncomfortable because you never know if there's a zombie going to come around the corner and take you out. So the constantly moving camera keeps audiences uncomfortable. And then some other things that aren't exactly in this scene. Pushing in can raise the tension in a scene. It can also bring your eye to like one very specific thing, like a ticking time bomb or someone's face, like if it's a big emotional reveal. And pulling away the camera makes it, diffuses the tension, but it can also isolate us from a character emotionally and make us feel like we're separated from them. A camera should never anticipate a character moving on screen. This is another rule about trying to make game cameras feel like film cameras, because in real life, an actor would move and then the cameraman would react to the actor moving. In games, we stage everything, so we think, oh, I'll just have the camera move exactly when the actor moves, but then it feels like the camera was anticipating what the actor was going to do, which wouldn't be possible in real film. So having the camera move start a few frames after the actor has started moving makes it feel more natural. And in order to replicate the feel of film, you'll want to have some way to key your field of view values. In games, it defaults to a wide lens, and you've seen, people talk about FOV all the time in shooters and stuff like that. It gives you a wide lens to see as much as possible. But in film, the lenses tend to be much more narrow to focus on faces and details, etc. Long lenses are ideal for close-ups, insert shots, or tight over the shoulders. They can create a sense of tension, but they can also create intimacy. They make you feel like you're closer to everybody in the scene. And also that in a long lens, all the characters are closer together. Because of the way it's shot, the lens is narrower, so everybody in that shot feels like they're squished together. In this example, the long lens makes the hug the main part of the frame. It fills the frame, the intimacy between these two characters. And then when Kate enters the frame in over the shoulder, it connects all of them. It makes them feel like they're all bonded together. Wide lenses tend to be for establishing shots that or just anything that's big and dramatic. A single figure in a wide frame, like if you have one single actor that's tiny in a giant wide frame, creates a feeling of isolation and emotional distance. Or a slightly wider FOV, and say an over-the-shoulder shot, can make more of a dramatic perspective, making someone feel bigger or smaller. Wide framing is also great for epic moments, especially ones involving giant boss creatures or vista reveals or massive explosions. In this example below from Minecraft Story Mode, the over-the-shoulder here with the tentacles, we see a tiny player character right down there, and then you just see a few of the tentacles right in frame. They're large, and it really emphasizes to you the size. And then here, the wide shot, it's a wide lens where we get some size references with the ground and the tree and some people running by, but then the camera pulls up and back, and you say, okay, this thing is taking up the whole sky. It is a massive beast. So the advantage to games is that they're very objective driven. So your shot structure can be like a series of thoughts that the player has to think about, like what they want in the next moment in the adventure or the next part of the romance, the conversation, what they want to say, etc. So if you can anticipate what your player wants in the next moment, that's what you should shoot next. If it's, for example, you say, someone says something mean to the player character, you want to see the camera focus on the player character's reaction so that you know where they are standing emotionally with what was just said, so you know how to react as the player character in the next moment. And you use all this to shape the order of your shots. And cutting between multiple shots is much easier for our eye to process than long continuous shots. If anyone has seen Gravity, the first 10 minutes or so is one long continuous shot, and it makes you very uncomfortable because our eyes are used to cuts. Cuts are like blinks. We tend to put a camera cut where a thought ends or someone turns their head anytime we shift gears in terms of what we're thinking about. Editing can also compress and lengthen the amount of time in a scene. It can make some scenes feel very hectic and chaotic and are happening so fast. They can also drag it out. If you have a lot of fast cuts, it makes the tension higher, it makes the emotional frustration higher. Whereas if you have longer shots with steady cameras, it feels like, okay, this is a slower, quieter moment. Or it can also be like a very tense moment as two characters stare each other down and there are no cuts and you're just waiting for something to happen. When the eyes shift, following the shot, follow what the character is looking at. If you have a close-up on someone's eyes and they look off to the side, you know, like in The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, as they're constantly looking around, every time the eyes move, the camera cuts to look at someone else to see what they're looking at. And this is really important in games because if your character looks somewhere else, you as the player want to immediately know what new information they have so that you two maintain the same amount of information in the game. So I have an example here. This is from Walking Dead Season 2. This is episode 2. They're at the ski lodge, and Clementine has been reunited with Kenny, but she has all these new friends, and Kenny is a bit unstable at this point. And so Kenny comes over to talk with her and her friends, but you can tell they don't like him, and he doesn't like them, and it's this constant building tension as we see the characters reacting to each other and Clementine's reaction to the whole situation. It mounts as the tension builds.
Hey there.
Hey,
Hope you like the food.
oh, it's great, thank you.
Peaches and beans. Great for nutrition. Not too great on the way out, though, I tell you. So it's Luke and Nick. Luke and Nick. You guys sure do look like a match.
What's that supposed to mean?
I'm just saying you look like good friends, that's all.
So, what was your plan here? Hold out for the winter?
Actually, we were thinking of moving on. Somewhere up north. You ever heard of a place called Wellington?
Wellington? The hell is that?
A place.
Yeah, Krista and I were going there.
It's supposed to be a big camp up near Michigan.
Michigan?
You got a hearing problem, kid? Yeah, Michigan. Think about it. Fresh water, lots of land, cold-ass winter, so the walkers get slow.
Sounds like bullshit.
Listen, Vanilla Ice, I don't know what your deal is, but you're more than welcome to take off in the morning.
That'd be just fine by me.
What's the deal with these guys, clown?
Hey, fuck you, buddy. It's fine, Nick. We're not staying.
She's staying.
Please, don't fight.
So you can see as the scene progresses, the shots get shorter and shorter and shorter as everyone's tempers and stress gets higher. And we're always refocusing on Clem because she is your window, she is your protagonist. So you always want to see how is she dealing with the situation, and that informs the player, how do I deal with this situation? This 4 minutes. In addition to framing cameras, cinematic designers are also responsible for staging actors and props and creating performances. There are a few unique moments where we have custom animations for certain moments, but for the most part we have to create these performances from scratch. So my favorite thing to do is what I call the camera ballet, where I stage the entire scene like football plays. I show top down where the characters are moving, where the camera is positioned, and as they move through the scene, how the emotional dynamics change based on where they're staged in the scene. Two characters facing each other straight on for an entire conversation can get pretty dull pretty quick. So if you have, say you have a couple examples like if a character enters and stands next to the character, you know that they're familiar or stands at an angle. Or if you're approaching a character, like in this scene in Defiance, she approaches straight on, but he's turned away from her and he's closed himself off emotionally to her until he has to give her certain information, and then that's when he turns to her. You want to keep the posing interesting for the character. A lot in cinematics we have different staging, like character poses that characters will hold and then they act through that pose. You don't want them holding one pose for the entire scene, but you also want every time they change pose to feel motivated. For example, like you don't want them doing one hand on hip for an entire 3-minute conversation. Nobody's going to hold that long in real life. But you don't want them to suddenly change poses in the middle of a conversation without any motivation. For example, if someone starts with their arms crossed, they are closed off to you, but then during the scene, if something is revealed to them and there's new information that they react to, they could go, what? And then that's when they would come out of it and go into a regular standing pose. It's always good to try and find some busy work for characters to do in a scene where very few times in real life are people waiting around for you to come talk to them. They have all these NPCs that are just standing there waiting for you to talk to them. So if you can introduce the scene where they are going about their NPC lives and then you go up to talk to them and keep it interesting, then they feel more alive, they feel more like people. And the environment can play a role in how characters are perceived. The environment can feel isolating, claustrophobic, familiar, or uncomfortable, depending on how the character is staged in it. If a character is in a forest with a ton of encroaching trees, they feel this pressure because they're just surrounded by this environment. Or if they're standing in front of a throne, they exude power. So this is an example from Defiance, where so Rin needs to tell Cooper, the sheriff, something, and he just does not care. This is his day off, so he's not really interested in talking to her. As she goes on her story to tell him, oh, I have this new information to protect this guy, she mentions her father, which he realizes he has information about her father, that he's in a coma, and he needs to tell her, but he doesn't want to breach that subject because it's tough. So this is him emotionally closed off from her. He's turned away from her. When she realizes he's hiding something, that's when he realizes he needs to give her this information, and he turns to her to give her this new information. So based on the fundamentals I've laid out, I have a couple grab bag tips that I've developed over the years. Just the kitchen sink of tips because they don't really fit into any one category. You need to consider your camera as an actor in the scene. And I've mentioned this, but imagine that they are your narrator. The camera is not just a box you set up in a room to point at two people and watch them talk. The camera is telling you how you should feel about the scene, not just what's happening. So allow your framing to be part of the emotional experience for your player. So whenever I get stuck and I don't know how to tell an emotional scene, or I'm getting stuck on how I want to express certain things, I go to reaction shots. And reaction shots are just showing people's faces and what they're reacting to in the scene. It works best when someone says a line to a character and then immediately you cut to a reaction shot to see how they react to that line. But we can read faces so much more quickly than we can read a line of dialogue, and they can happen simultaneously. You can have one character saying a line to your protagonist, and then you can also, while the character is still saying that line, cut to your protagonist, see their expression, and you've delivered twice as much information in 2 shots that 2 lines of dialogue would have taken twice as long. Like I said, you want to make it feel like a real camera, so something that could exist in physical space. It feels like a gamey camera when you start to let it swoop around and it has no physics and it doesn't have a physicality to it. So a couple of tips to keep that working in a game is only move on 2 axes at a time, never 3 axes. Very, very rarely can you get a physical camera that can move like at a diagonal. You want it to either be moving side to side or up and down like a crane. Something that feels like it was attached to a camera rig or a dolly or a hand. You want to make it feel like it's attached to an actual person to make it the cinematics feel like they contain real people in real settings. And trust your gut. I mean, it took me a long time to put this talk together because so much of what I've done is I studied film and then I watched shots and I kept working and working and working until they worked. We all understand film. We all understand when film affects us emotionally. And so it's really about just continuously testing your scene, seeing when it doesn't land, and trying to mess with new techniques, looking up techniques and looking up film, like how can I make this slightly more uncomfortable? How can I make this a little more emotionally intimate? And just keep testing it until it feels right, because so much of what cinematics is just feel. It's hard to boil it down to a science. So I have a couple examples I just wanted to break down. In this scene, this is from Walking Dead Season 2, Episode 1. Clem is alone in the woods, and what I really wanted to tell in this scene was Clem has never been alone before. She's 11 years old, in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. She's been bitten by a dog. She's had a bad day. She's tired, she's hungry, and what I wanted to show is she doesn't know what she's supposed to do or where she's supposed to go. She's supposed to feel isolated and lost, and she's trying to put one foot in front of the other until she just can't, and she just falls into despair. Good? Yes. And the other facet of this too, just to mention quickly, is that since you're playing as Clementine, you're always trying to move forward as a player. You're trying to take your character and move them forward through the world. And at what point do you just have nothing to move forward to? So as you see, the cameras isolate her. They put her small, when she's walking through the woods, she's small, she's center frame, so we're focused on her story, but she also feels like she's lost in this big forest. Most of the cameras don't focus on where she's going, except for this one. Most of them focus on her face, indicating that we don't really know, she doesn't know where she's going. The focus is on her, and she's constantly moving and trying to look for where to go. The camera spins around her, and as she finally falls into despair, it just settles on her face, and she's like, well, this is where I'm going to be now. This one's a little more uplifting. This is from Star Wars: The Old Republic, and the main focus I wanted for this scene was that you feel like you've just defeated this giant droid. It's huge, it's like 100 feet tall. And you have to repair the droid to help it attack the other droids that are still attacking you. So you're like, oh, we're going to use this weapon against them. So, but what's required is that the player has to pilot it.
Contact, I found my shuttle. Running a pre-flight check. We're in business. Signal's weak though. I need to be on the roof to boost the connection.
We're ready.
The logic circuits are fried. Somebody will have to control this thing from the inside.
Are you kidding? I'm a walking tank. It's payback time.
Now we know what to get you for Life Day.
So the biggest purpose of this scene is just player wish fulfillment. But what I wanted to do is I wanted the droid to feel as big as possible. So shot it in these very large, wide shots, made everyone look very small in comparison to it. And the best part, my favorite part, is where after Vet says, somebody has to pilot this thing. No one has brought that up before. She says, hey, someone's going to have to pilot this thing. And my assumption is, well, the player is going to assume that they're going to pilot it. They're the hero. So there's no need to say anything. We just get a reaction shot of the player going, yeah, I'm going to pilot this thing. And then they climb in. Then after, so you can see that here. After they climb into it, every shot on the companions is shot from above because the player's perspective has changed. They're way up there now. So they're sitting from a place of power and above all their companions. And then the camera shakes that happen in the scene make the giant droid feel like this huge thing that would just shake a room. Last example. This is from Minecraft Story Mode. So this is where Jesse and his friends have ended up in the Nether accidentally, and they're on a minecart ride, and they're just trying to survive. And the thing about Minecraft Story Mode is that it's supposed to be like a cartoon. It's supposed to be fun, chaotic, silly, ridiculous things are constantly happening, but you want it to stay light and fun. So I drove the scene with trying to keep it fast-paced, keep the camera cuts as tight as possible, but also cut to the reaction shots of Jesse, the protagonist, as much as possible to let the jokes land.
Oh no! Okay, so I'm not the only one seeing that we're running out of track, right? No? Good.
Jesse, that switch! Now, do it!
Oh, arms don't fail me now. Wow. I thought something bad was going to happen there, but I guess everything's going to be... Whoa!
Jesse!
No!
Wait!
Oh, man!
Axel? Olivia? Ruben? Hang on, Ruben! Ruben! Okay, Ruben, remember how I said everything was going to be just fine before? I know I was wrong then, but I have a very good feeling about it. Whoa! Doc!
So the scene keeps bouncing between, oh my god, everything is happening all at once, and then suddenly it's silent. And you take, you go, okay, what just happened? Where am I? Where did I go just now? But that's sort of the comedic timing of it. And you'll see some stuff in there that does break my rule of trying to keep cameras as real as possible, just for the sake of comedic timing. Like you have these fast zooms that would go to the button so you can see it in time. But there are like a bit of film tricks here and there that you can break once in a while that makes sense. But yeah, everything is about how does Jesse feel about all this madness? And then when the minecarts separate, suddenly there's this moment of quiet. Or when he presses the button and they're about to run into lava, then there's this moment of quiet. And it's this constant bouncing back and forth of quick, fast shots, and then slower shots, quick, fast shots, slower shots. So I want to give a little bit of an outline of what you need to make this stuff. And honestly, this is my hope, is that I can introduce these techniques and it's a little bit of an overview of how I do it so that you can bring a cinematic experience to games that don't have a huge motion capture budget. Stuff that doesn't have all the bells and whistles of staging a full, beautifully AAA rendered scene. Like, you can still tell really good stories without this giant budget. So the biggest upfront investment is an animation library that can be used on all, most if not all of your skeletons. It has stuff like locomotion, body and facial moods, conversational gestures, brow and eye animations, head turns. This is just a basic library of things for gestures and talking and stuff that you can layer animations on top of, and I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, so you want most of them to be additive. The idea behind additive animation is anything that's not a locomotion that needs to land on the ground or touch a doorknob or stuff needs to be able to be layered on top of each other. So for example, if you have a shrug animation and an arms out animation, if they're additive, you can play both of them at the same time and they do this. They put them together. So this is the linchpin for creating cinematics, because you can create tons of different performances from a very limited library of animations. You want a camera system, being able to key your camera around the space, and being able to key your field of view. And your field of view is going to change shot by shot by shot. Close-ups will have a tighter field of view, whereas a wide shot will have a bigger FOV. And finally, the timeline that brings it all together. Oh, I forgot to mention, depth of field. It's a nice to have. It does definitely make your cameras feel more realistic. Depth of field is where there's a blur in different subjects in close-up long lenses. So it either blurs out the foreground or it blurs out the background. And it's not necessary, but it's definitely nice to have to make your scenes feel more cinematic. And finally, the timeline editor. So if you have all of your actors, your cameras, and your sound and objects all living as agents on a timeline, you want to be able to do the basic stuff, key their position, rotation, scale, so you can stage the scene and keep them moving around in the scene. But the key for what I do, and the way I do it, and this is how they do it on The Witcher 3, is animations live as blocks. They are block tracks that live on each actor. And you can see in this example, they're taking an animation block and they're stretching it out so that the gesture takes twice as long to do. This is all I do, is put stuff on a timeline and layer it and make new performances over and over and over again. But yeah, this is how you create unique performances every time, because then layer that on top of him walking and entering in frame, or then looking to the left, and putting all that together, you can create tons of new experiences and moments with a very limited amount of assets. And track priorities is also another nice to have. It's if you can prioritize an animation above the others. If they're not all set at the same priority, you can prioritize one animation above the others if someone has to be able to grab a doorknob or punch a face, so you know that animation is going to line up and no other additive animations are going to interrupt it. So you don't need cinematics to tell an emotionally engaging story, but they are a useful tool in your narrative arsenal. Film language is an accessible tool that almost all audiences are familiar with, so take advantage of it. Make it your friend. And it can enhance the emotional investment in your game. And finally, cinematic presentation can belong in everyone's toolkit. You don't need an enormous motion capture budget to make a scene look and feel great. I think Telltale is a great example of that, because their games are cartoony, but you still feel very emotionally attached to these characters. It doesn't have to look realistic for it to be emotionally impactful. All you really need is a bit of film knowledge and instinct to create emotionally impactful scenes, even at the lowest poly count. So I hope this talk has given some insight into how you and your team can create emotional moments with cameras and bring emotional depth to your cinematics, and I'm really excited to see all the stories you build. Thanks. I have a very brief amount of time for questions, I think. A couple minutes if anybody has any.
I would just, I know you obviously had to study film, but there's a lot of films that have a very experimental camera. I'm from a film background too. The stuff like Tree of Life, Gravity, the camera is crazy. It doesn't have the same shot, reverse shot, you know. It's like a lot of times, and you get in a lot of video games, you have the scene, you have the dialogue, then you have the shot, reverse shot, and then you have the profile, then the shot, reverse shot, and the profile. A lot of times, what kind of things do you hope that video games would do more of that you feel like needs to be done, I would say?
So what do I want to see games do in terms of film?
Yeah, like what types of adaptations? I know a lot of people, I don't know, the camera is a little bit, you know, off the, they don't put much priority.
Yeah, I want to see people learn more from, you know, lessons from film, and this is obviously a crash course in the basics of it. And you know, filmmakers like Alfonso Cuarón and Edgar Wright are constantly breaking the rules because we have established them. But you have to go through the rules first. I think games still need to. I think we're getting to the point where games are really borrowing from classic film techniques, and I think it's going to be a different path from film. That games, because of their interactive nature, the camera needs to behave in a different way. So, and in the ways that film has experimented and gone in different directions, games may not be able to, and go in the same, you know, go down the same path. Or they may be able to invent something different that film can't. I think if you look at what Tomb Raider does, which I love, they have cutscenes, but they also have the camera manipulation in the gameplay. And they are trying to create a more emotional experience by manipulating like what you can control with the camera. And it definitely comes down to what's our contract with the player? How much control are we allowed to take from them in order to tell a story, rather than letting them experience the story in whatever way they want to.
Thank you.
This is a little bit more on the linear storytelling path, but do you have any thoughts about how the camera was used in Metal Gear Solid 5, where they kept going from the
switching back and forth between like a cinematic camera and a gameplay camera.
Well, not really necessarily a gameplay camera, but actually just switching from making standard sort of three-quarter shots or raw landscapes to making it seem like there's a guy holding the camera, walking around, following.
Yeah, I think that's a style, but I think from my personal experience that sticking one or the other is good, at least being consistent across one scene. I think it can be used for a certain effect, like a handheld camera makes it feel more documentary, it feels like someone is following you around, whereas a camera that's steady feels like it was on a rig and the scene is staged and choreographed. So I personally would pick between one or the other for one scene, but you know, everybody breaks the rules in different ways for different reasons.
I came in late, so I'm sorry I can talk about this, but what's your like previs process? Do you storyboard? Do you do a rough cut? I'm assuming you don't just like, boom, here's awesomeness, let's do this while it's still... Like...
Some people think I do. I do have colleagues that storyboard in their cinematic work. I am very much, I like building it in the 3D space. I like examining the 3D space because it's a game world and I want to know what the player's going to feel like when they're moving around in it. So my staging tends to be, I remove the camera entirely from the situation first, and then I see, okay, where could the actors go that feel natural? That where does their movement feel like, okay, they would definitely move this distance, or no, they need to be closer together, this conversation's too far apart. And then depending on where I've moved them, then I bring the camera in and I say, okay, how can I portray this relationship the way I want to as they move through the scene? And then I do adjust as I go along, but like my first draft is always characters just standing in place and steady like just a flat key camera or a stepped key camera and build the whole scene and then say, does the pacing feel right? Do I feel like all the shots have enough breathing room in terms of like the conversation goes too fast or this moment doesn't land long enough? And then I can go in and like perfect where they're staged, how the cameras move through the scene, etc.
Is there like a director that like then reviews like the shots and goes, this is too long, or missing the story point here? Like, how's that review process work for
Oh, like a director on an episode?
Yeah.
Yeah, at least at Telltale, every episode has a director, and we just have scene reviews, and we go from first playable to ratings to polish. So we have 3 check-ins throughout the scene, and they'll watch it, and the trick is, like with a director, they can usually tell where you're going with the shot. Not so much for people, you know, and producers and stuff like that. So it's good to have, usually the directors come from the cinematic pool, so they can see where you're planning on going with the shot. Whereas if it's not fully realized for people who aren't familiar with it, they think, oh, this looks really boring. Cool. If you're interested in anything I talked about here or want to reference any of it, I have put it up on my website on my contact page. And that's all my contact information. And yeah, enjoy the rest of ECGC. Thanks.